In 1971, two young men walked into a lion enclosure at a wildlife park outside London, and a fully grown male lion ran straight at them. Not a slow approach, a full sprint. Zookeepers watching from the fence braced for the worst. Then the lion leapt, planted his paws on both men's chests, and started licking their faces like an overgrown house cat who'd been waiting all year for them to come home. Because he had been. His name was Christian. A year earlier, he'd been a cub the two men bought from a department store, raised in their small apartment, and eventually released into the wild in Kenya once he got too big for city life. Nobody expected him to remember them. Lions don't run a farewell tour through the old neighborhood. But there he was, a year later, a fully wild animal with his own territory and his own pride, sprinting toward two specific humans out of everyone in that park. The footage exists. Millions of people have watched it, and almost everyone asks the same question. Do animals actually remember the people who once meant something to them? Or is this just instinct? A smell, a shape, a leftover association with food that fades the moment it stops being useful? The honest answer is more layered than most people expect. And once you start pulling on it, it gets stranger. Start with what memory in animals is actually built from, because most explanations skip this part. Scientists split it into two rough categories. Semantic memory is general knowledge, the kind of thing that doesn't need a specific moment attached to it, like knowing rustling grass can mean danger. Episodic memory is different. It's the ability to recall one specific event, at one specific time, involving one specific individual. For decades, researchers assumed only humans had real episodic memory, since it seemed to require a self-awareness animals weren't supposed to have. Then the studies started rolling in, and they didn't cooperate. Researchers at the University of Washington spent years studying wild crows on campus, and what they found unsettled a lot of people. Crows captured and released while a researcher wore a specific rubber mask, began mobbing anyone wearing that mask years later, screaming alarm calls, and dive-bombing them from above. Not because of smell, not a single encounter. They remembered a specific face tied to a specific threat, years later, and they taught that memory to other crows who had never even met the researcher, who hadn't even been born when the mask first appeared. That's not instinct. That's recorded history, passed down socially, inside a brain the size of a walnut. Somewhere on that campus, a crow that never met the researcher is still screaming at a stranger's face because its parents warned it to. But the next case makes even that look simple. But researchers weren't expecting to find the same pattern in an animal with no bones and a brain split across 8 separate arms. At the Seattle Aquarium, staff noticed one octopus had started targeting a single volunteer, not the other keepers, not the visitors. Her, specifically, with a jet of water aimed straight at her face every time she walked past. They tested it. She changed her uniform. She approached from different angles. The octopus still knew her, and still soaked her every time. An animal separated from us by 500 million years of evolution had built something that looked exactly like a grudge and aimed it at one face only. Picture that tank going still the second she walks in, one arm already coiling. Recognition like this might not be a mammal thing or a bird thing. It might be baked into intelligence itself, whatever body it's wearing. Then there's a case that doesn't fit neatly into any theory, which is exactly what makes it worth looking at. For over 3 decades, a wild, solitary bottlenose dolphin off the coast of the Turks and Caicos Islands has chosen to spend his life near humans instead of his own species, and specifically near one man, a conservationist who has known him since the 1980s. Jojo has pushed disoriented swimmers back toward shore during dangerous currents, guided boats away from reef damage, and reportedly gone still and gentle around children, while staying rough and territorial with strangers who get too close too fast. A wild predator with teeth built for tearing fish apart, choosing gentleness, selectively, toward specific people for over 30 years. 30 years. That kind of consistency doesn't look like confusion. It looks like a relationship. Picture him for a second, drifting just beneath the surface, waiting for one particular boat. But the next story is the one that convinced even the divers who lived it. In 2005, a female humpback whale got tangled in crab trap lines off San Francisco. Hundreds of pounds of rope cutting into her, dragging her down. A rescue team spent nearly an hour freeing her, working inches from an animal that outweighed their boat. When the last rope came off, she didn't bolt the way frightened animals usually do. She swam slow, deliberate circles around every diver, nudging each one gently with her head before finally swimming away. One of the divers later said it felt less like an escape and more like a goodbye. Whether that's projection or something real, nobody can prove it. But she didn't have to circle back. Nothing was stopping her. She was free. She stayed anyway, just long enough to be seen. So what is actually happening inside these brains? Scientists went looking for where this lives, and what they found was stranger than expected. Many species, mammals, birds, even the octopus, appear to tag emotionally significant moments the same way human brains do, marking them for long-term storage instead of letting them fade like everything else. Fear gets stored differently than a quiet afternoon. Relief gets stored differently than routine. An animal that was starving, trapped, or dying, and then felt that exact threat lifted by one specific individual, isn't just logging the word safe. It's keeping the whole scene, the fear, the hands, the voice, the exact moment it stopped, filed away like a photograph the brain refuses to let fade. That's why it holds for years instead of hours. Which brings the story back to Christian the lion, sprinting across that enclosure a year after he'd been released into the wild. He hadn't just learned that 2 humans meant food once. Something in him had tagged an entire chapter, the apartment, the years of comfort, the release, as meaningful enough to remember. And apparently, to run toward. Not away, toward. Here's what science can say with real confidence. Large-brained social animals, primates, elephants, cetaceans, and some birds, carry memory systems sophisticated enough to hold on to specific individuals across years, sometimes decades. The emotional tagging behind that memory predates humans by tens of millions of years, wired deep into brains that split from ours long before we existed. And the pattern of animals recognizing former rescuers, specifically, consistently, is too repeated across too many species to wave away as a coincidence. What science genuinely cannot answer yet is whether any of this comes with a subjective feeling attached, something we'd recognize as gratitude, something the animal experiences as "I remember what you did for me." We don't have an instrument that measures that, not yet. But nothing prepared even the scientists for what happened next, in a story that has nothing to do with rescue at all, and everything to do with loss. In 2003, a wildlife conservationist named Lawrence Anthony took in a herd of traumatized, aggressive elephants that no other reserve would accept, elephants that had already killed people and were scheduled to be shot. He spent years earning their trust, sometimes sleeping near their enclosure, slowly building something that looked, against every expectation, like a bond. In 2012, he died suddenly at his home in South Africa. No one called the elephants, no one guided them. 2 days later, 2 separate wild herds, living miles apart, herds that hadn't seen him in over a year, began walking through thick bush in single file for more than 12 hours until they reached the exact house where he lived. They stood outside it for 2 full days, not eating, barely moving. Then, just as quietly as they came, they turned and walked back into the bush. Nobody can prove what those elephants understood. Nobody can prove what the whale meant by circling back, or what Jojo has been choosing for 30 years, or why a wild lion ran toward 2 specific men instead of away from every human on Earth. But something arrived that day, and something walked slow circles around those divers, and something sprinted across an enclosure toward 2 faces it hadn't seen in a year. Whatever that something is, it showed up when nothing was making it show up. And maybe that's the only answer we're going to get. And maybe it's enough.